Record?
You can record.
I'm recording. We're going.
You're very good at this.
You're listening to Nerds Out of Water with Michael Lobb and David Camus.
Okay, Michael, our guest today is a self-professed change whisperer. This lovely person has created change in some of the most difficult areas around the globe. I first met her delivering value-driven improvements and transformation on a 96,000 person rollout in Australia. She's gone from strength to strength, producing articles on process and productivity improvements. One of her colleagues recently stated, if your change project is complex, faces strong stakeholder resistance, involves politics at multiple levels, and has challenges considered insurmountable, then stop reading and go and engage her. I'm really proud to introduce to you my good friend, director, owner, and change whisperer, Michelle Delebet from Corporate Growing Pains.
Thank you very much, David, for that very warm welcome.
What a welcome. How are you?
Outstanding, thank you. Enjoying
That's
life,
outstanding.
staying warm in this crazy winter weather we've got going on now.
It changed very suddenly, didn't it?
It sure did. Went from being sunny and beautiful to, oh my God, where are all my jumpers?
To light the fire. It's been a pretty hard couple of months for everyone over the last little while, notwithstanding the cold, but how are you and your family doing?
Thanks for asking, Michael. My family's doing pretty good. My hubby is now working from home, which is a wonderful thing. He's loving it and doing really well. So we're hoping that that can be a change that is sustainable going forward. I have brothers in Melbourne and one in Santiago in Chile.
Wow.
So they are both struggling with greater lockdowns than we're experiencing here in Queensland. Santiago's just gone into a second round of quarantine in the city. He's pretty deeply impacted. My dad is in Adelaide. He's an 3, 4 something year old man who I really noticed the difference, the impact for him, in that he didn't get to interact with people quite so often, and because he's not very tech savvy. But by and large, he's healthy. So we have done well. We're all in jobs. We're all still working. We're all still busy. It's all good for us.
Great.
Interestingly, my 90-year-old dad has had more conversations with people than he's ever had before. It's quite interesting how tech he has become good at using Skype against his ear.
I really wish it had been different for Dad. I'd been down in Adelaide in late February, early March, and I had planned to go back in 6 weeks' time to help him adopt some of the tech that we've set up for him, but they closed the borders, and that was the end of that plan. So we've just been dealing with using the phone, so it's better than nothing.
Great.
Michelle, I've known you quite a while now, and I heard a whisper that you were the director of a golf course. Are you a secret golfer at heart? And how the hell did you get that role?
Well, David, I think it's more accurately described as a temporary lapsed golfer. I'm not sure you're ever a secret golfer, but and I'm a hard-nosed match play competitor. I love match play, but I'm a bit mediocre otherwise. Although I do have a few trophies in the other room, and I did get my handicap down to 19 at one stage, but maybe in a few more years when I have to work a little bit less, I can. But how I got into the role of director is that I can't help myself when I see operations that are gridlocked or stuck in the past or can benefit from new ways of thinking and operating. I just have to get involved. I can't stand on the sidelines and say, well, it's all your problem and you sort it out. So I stepped up and I did a massive advertising campaign to get onto the board, and I got voted on. I got told off several times for doing an advertising campaign because apparently
Don't we
that's
all?
not something. And but in my 12 months, I must have asked a few too many pointed questions. I was not successful in getting elected a second time, so I stepped away. The timing was right to step away anyway. But I learned a great deal, as you can imagine, from that experience.
But did it increase your handicap?
Well, yeah, maybe it did, because I spent too much time sorting out boardroom stuff rather than being on the golf course.
That would have been a real challenge as well, especially a company or an organization like that that's probably fairly stuck in their ways, and someone like you coming on board with new ideas, saying, "Hey, we could make this a whole lot better."
Yeah, and even maybe a bit more than that. I was chief operating officer of a consulting engineering firm across the globe at the time, so P&Ls and balance sheets are very familiar things to me, and managing assets effectively and making sure they're not lazy. I'm a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors as well, and so this governance is really important to me. And in my head, we needed to have a whole step change in the level of professionalism, and there were some that had some ideas that they could do that. But yet it was still a very old ways dominated environment, and yeah, you can only do what you can only do. And as I didn't have the time actually to serve on the second year, I was pretty happy to be stepping aside. And you know what? That's great, because now when I play golf, I'm playing golf purely for pleasure. We play
enjoyment.
all across the world. That's where I mainly play, is overseas now, not locally. And it's become a treat again, and it almost become a bit of a job.
So yeah, you mentioned that you've worked overseas a lot. We've obviously got an office in Vietnam. I've been working in with clients in the US, in Asia, and obviously here in New Zealand. How compatible have you found your work style or approach, and how does it change when you move across the borders?
It's a really interesting question, Michael. And I'm sure you have some things to share to this as well. So there are a couple of things that I think are core, that authenticity and curiosity, you just can't beat them as foundation stones, right? And if there's one thing I know to be universal, it's that we all have two ears and one mouth. And so if we actually use that general approach when integrating into new environments, it works pretty effectively. And can, in fact, overcome a whole lot of, say, language barriers, let alone cultural barriers. I think also that smiles and genuine interest are so powerful. So from there, if they're the foundation stones, whatever you have to build on top of those become quite straightforward to adapt to. I think the biggest challenge is always the actual language barrier. But you know what? Isn't Google Translate fantastic? And Duolingo? I mean, seriously, they are like game changers in trying to do business across the world. And I am currently on, 227 straight days of learning Spanish on Duolingo.
Okay.
And recently submitted our first tender for a client of mine in Spanish, which I was able to put together with a good combination of my knowledge. I have a few languages under my belt, so language knowledge as well. So, helping people and wanting to help people breaks down so many barriers. What do you think?
Yeah, the language barrier has never really interfered too much, but one thing you mentioned was curiosity, and I find that that's a really important a really hugely key component, because if you're not curious, then you're not learning. And a lot of these people that we've worked with overseas found that they were very curious about different things that we were doing, or different ways to do things, but they're often too shy to speak up.
Right. And
especially in
finding
Asia,
ways,
because where the culture is very different to here.
totally, and finding ways to reveal that. It's a similar thing occurs in South America. You know, they have such a distinctly different cultural premise from what we have here in Australia, which I would largely describe as every person for themselves.
Yeah.
Maybe not post COVID-19, but still, it's a long and heavily ingrained tradition of every person for themselves and cut every tall poppy down in the meantime, to having this environment where you have to try and, or where you've got hierarchy, there's respect for elders that is, you know, just something else entirely from what we have. And how do you create safe spaces for people to have those conversations?
Talking Google Translate and other technologies, what does corporate growing pains use to manage their workloads and across the boundaries? What do you use to keep your operations moving?
Yeah, so I've been designing, implementing, and using geographically distributed work systems for more than 2 decades now. And so there's probably very little I haven't used somewhere along the lines. I had the very great privilege of working at Optus when it first started in Australia under Bob Mansfield and Ian Boatman. What great inspirational guys they were. And that was the first truly integrated system, and even then they weren't. They were only, leading edge. The telecommunications network itself was, but the business systems weren't. And so I had a great opportunity to design for them a few systems that allowed us to better collaborate across locations and keep track of information you'd think was fairly basic information for an organisation that size. But they too were a startup, so having those nascent systems in place from which they could learn and then build more comprehensive and more sustainable systems later actually worked pretty effectively for them. So nowadays, God, there's so much available, and it just seems like everybody needs to change every 5 minutes. I mean, what's your experience in the last 6 months? I've tried Zoom and Google Meet and Hangouts and Skype for Business, and I don't think there's anything that I haven't tried to find an easy to use BC system that is reliable for end users, and we just adapt. We just use everything. So
yeah, I think that's what it comes down to, is you end up using everything. I mean, I've got a pretty generic out of office response if I'm traveling, which just says you can contact me on WhatsApp, Line, Facebook, Messenger, WeChat, Slack, ... Yeah, exactly. And it's crazy how many accounts I've got for communication. Then with video conferencing, I've got 3 meetings today. One of them's on this, another one's on Zoom, another one's on Skype, and I'm sure that tomorrow I've got one on Microsoft Teams. So, it's kind of like everybody needs to relax, and maybe we need to build a protocol that is shared amongst people so that we can use the tool of our choice to communicate with everybody else.
I think we did a podcast on this 2 podcasts ago, Michael, all about connectivity and communications and how we were all connecting with each other.
I probably had a rant then as well.
You did, if I remember right.
Yesterday we had a client. So what we've discovered then is there's a whole lot of very responsible IT departments with a range of clients of mine that the minute that you set up a Google Meet, for example, no, they can't hear you or they can't see what you're presenting, because they're on Cisco. Often it's Cisco systems, and so they send, or WebEx, and so they send you theirs. Yesterday I was using Cisco. I'd noticed that I could be given control of somebody else's, and so when we do these little pitches, somebody else does the technical demonstration. I do the initial pitch and the end pitch, and I said, well, why don't we just do it all off your laptop today?
Yeah.
You give me control, I'll go through the slides, and you can take control back, or I'll give you control back, and then, so we're testing this out just before we start. I take control, I'm like, da, 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 da. This is going great. Okay, Alex, I'm going to try giving you back control. None of us could find how to do that. And people are going, Alex, just take control back. I have no control of my computer.
I can't control my computer.
I know nothing.
So I'm with you on the rants, but let me tell you about two things that I have found lately that I really would like to share more widely, because I think I'm sure you deal with clients that are large and small just like I do. And I had to help a client recently sort out their payroll system, and I really resent the major players in the marketplace, MyOb and Xero, and the rorting that I think, here's my rant, Michael, the rorting that they are doing with their charges. And so I'm forever in search of free systems. And Payroller is an awesome system, simple to use, free, and useful in the Australian marketplace. It has the JobKeeper. They rapidly adapted to incorporate JobKeeper. So I think it's a really useful free system for managing payroll of all sorts of sizes. Of course, it has some limitations, but it's worth a look in. And the other one, of course, that we all get frustrated about is our accounting package, right? And so Wave.
We can't live without it, though. I don't want to be going through receipts and invoices and putting them into a spreadsheet.
No, I've got a client who still is using a spreadsheet, and so I have had to just drag them kicking and screaming. It's taking me 18 months, but finally they're on the journey to changing over, and I think that's partly because I found Wave, and Wave has a payroll piece in it as well, but isn't compatible to Australian payroll. But the system itself for accounting has a simple chart of accounts. It's very nice interface. It allows you to raise invoices, track all your purchases, your receipts. It even has an app that's a big pain in the backside to actually get onto your phone. But once you've got it on, then you can take photos of your receipts and it uploads directly and all those sorts of things. And all for the cost of you sacrificing information about your receipts. So they sell you disaggregated data. And the other thing that I realise that they do is, because you can, if you choose to accept credit cards, that will go through their system and they'll click the ticket on the way. I think it's a great business model and allows companies to get started with an accounting package much sooner, I think, than they would normally.
Yeah, rather than forking out $70 a month for Xero.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, yeah, tech.
Which the rest of us are all forking out.
Well, you too can change. I know someone who can help you with that.
Oh, do you know a good change person? I know a change whisperer. So you spoke then about Wave, which had the payroll system wasn't particularly Australianized, not compatible. Have you found many software packages, large and small, that are like that around the place as you've been doing your change work, that you may have been looking at implementing, but not compatible with the way we operate in Australia?
Yes. There's always adaptation that needs to be made, and I think it's one of the biggest mistakes that organisations take is they think that they can apply a cookie cutter methodology around the world. They can't even do that around their own country, to be fair. Nuance, local nuance is so important, and it's part of it harks back to that earlier topic we were on with cultural differences of different locations. You have to be able to incorporate cultural nuance, and that can change in Australia. That can change from state to state. It can change from local government to local government. So having an element of agility within the system that allows you to just tweak to those nuance create a fabric of standardisation, but allow some flexibility to bring people along on their own change path. You never know when you're going to find a better way of doing something that could be incorporated into another area. One of the examples, though, that I'll give you is I had a major mining client a few years ago who wanted to change the way they captured and reported and analysed operating time. And so they'd gone ahead and designed a new mining information system. And what they needed to do was comply with the operating reporting of the company, which was dealing in a different commodity. And there was a massive hoo-ha about, well, that operating time reporting system won't work for coal because that's from iron and it's just not the same, and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, they went ahead and redesigned it to allow that nuance to be brought together, and so that the organisation, one of the largest resources companies in the world, could look at their global operations and look at where their operating time trends might be. Particularly valuable, of course, to the procurement department and negotiating deals with big suppliers, but also really valuable to the local user, the individual mine, the individual piece of plant, and really starting to bring that big thinking of, well, here's the system that you've got to use, and actually making it useful to that end user. What I like to call low-hanging fruit is something that it's foundational to my change methodology, my change whispering, shall I say.
Oh, change whispering methodology. That's not a change methodology that I've actually heard of recently.
Well, you say that, and that's the art, right? Because good change should be change that that is self-determining. But to find that path of self-determination, you have to be introduced to new ideas in a way that you can digest them and make sense of them for yourself. And for me, that's what change whispering is all about. It is that. I know I've done my job exceptionally well when my client comes to me one day and says, Michelle, I'd like to do, and the next things out of that person's mouth are things that we've been talking about for some time. I go, job done. I don't need to own the idea. They have to own the idea.
Yes.
And it always helps when they come back to you with the same idea that you gave to them a year ago.
Mate, I had this, just not tech example, but I think this was one of my earliest realizations. I had this old boss, he was an old mate of mine, and we moved into a much bigger space, and so we got to fit it out ourselves. And I said, there is no way we are just having beige walls or white walls. It's just, we need to have a bit of life. And so I picked this vibrant, but not too vibrant, yellow. It was like a sunburst, almost a little bit, I don't know. Anyway, it a really pleasant, not too bright yellow. And he was like, oh, geez, I don't think so. And I gave him a choice of a few to pick from, and he picked one that was a bit dulled down, but still acceptable to me. Anyhow, we went on, did that fit out, and 6 months later, when we did the launch, and for the next several years that we were in that premises, every time someone said, oh, I really like those yellow walls, he would say, oh, it's my best idea I ever had. And the first time he said it in front of me, I was like, rah! And then I was like, hang on. Yes, it was the best idea you've ever had.
I have done my job. So with COVID-19 happening and all the changes that are happening and our lives altering probably forever, how do you see your space operating? Is it going to change for you?
Well, I hope it's going to change for me, David, because what I've been frustrated by in the past is that clients have so little idea of what it is to facilitate change that they feel like they need a backside on a seat for 40 hours a week to get it done. And that is fundamentally untrue. And any change manager who tells you different is desperate to pay their mortgage. So the notion is, what are you doing to facilitate change? And sure, many organisations need bits of paper to be filled out to demonstrate that you're meeting KPIs and those sorts of things. But the reality is, what is the outcome that you're looking for? And the outcome is change that is accepted, adopted, and with little productivity dip. And so there are many ways to do this, and I'm not a big fan of paperwork myself. So I would much rather spend the time understanding where the low-hanging fruit is and finding ways to bridge the gap between that and that business need and the tech design to get the win, because it's amazing how quickly that changes the productivity. So I would hope that going forward, clients, employers have woken up to the idea that I don't actually need someone sitting right where I can see them. Like, there's a massive addiction to this control of what is directly in your view, right? And they need to let it go, because there's a whole lot of really independent adults out there working for each other that could be doing things more productively, differently, in better ways, and still getting a great result. So more
Agree.
offline, I think. How do you think it's changing for you?
Well, I have to say, around the workloads that we're doing, most people are still working from home. But the ones of us that are going back are seeing a very different workplace. They're seeing more stand-up desks, more shared spaces, so there is a larger gap in between people sitting down at desks. I know that in the government at the moment, they're literally ripping out desks, every other desk, to put in putting in a stand-up desk, which is going to be a shared desk, so there's not somebody there all the time. It's an interesting, okay, but I agree. I think that if you are not going to work, that's when it's going to stand out, because the people working from home are nearly always more productive. More productive. And the ones that aren't more productive, they need usually some coaxing and some tools and some energy put into them to make them productive. The ones that don't want to work, all of a sudden they're going to stand out. They will be, you'll be able to see the people who are not willing to do the work because they've never done the work. They've never done the work when they're being overlooked, and they're not going to do the work when they're at home either.
Right. I think there are genuinely some roles in the world that cannot be done from home. And I think there are genuinely some people who cannot work from home for a myriad reasons.
Yep.
And letting them be the ones that should be in the workplace, I think, is so important. And let the rest of us get on with it and be more productive because we're at home. Let's teach the leaders how to manage geographically distributed teams more effectively. Let's help them focus on performance in ways that go beyond looking at bloody numbers on a display board, and start to genuinely connect with the people that they're working with and start to overcome the very issues that you're talking about. And
Michelle, you've worked in some amazing places. I'm sure that you've got plenty of political stories to tell us. Is there one that stands out that you're allowed or permitted to be able to whisper into our ears?
well, there are many that stand out and many that I shouldn't tell at this point in time. But there is one that's, I think, is quite interesting because it sort of relates to, I think, what's going on in the world with COVID-19 at the moment, and I'll come to how it relates. So I was implementing this mining information system, and we had direct stakeholders across 5 sites, and it impacted about 1,800 personnel, and I had indirect stakeholders in other locations across the globe. And it involved a very substantial change to current state. So there was enormous resistance to change. In fact, the reason I was there was because somebody had rung up and said, we've got you like poison chalices, don't you? I'm like, well, you like projects that are, really stuck, where the tech team who's developing a system has been told never to return to site, where there's massive resistance to change. And I'm just like, oh, bring it on. How could you not get better than that?
I love those ones.
Totally.
Sounds like one much closer to home. But anyway.
Yes, indeed. And so, anyway, I thought that sounds like a lot of fun. So off I went, and I had to do a lot of travel across these 5 sites, and we got to the last site to come online, and they were ready, and they just kept putting up these little BS roadblocks, and I just couldn't find a way to get around them. And in the end, I'm a great believer in the rip the rug out theory. Eventually you've just got to get on with it. You've got to do it. And there was actually no real reason why we couldn't. I'd personally written the training program and delivered the training program to everybody after I'd discovered what the problem was. And so everybody knew what they needed to know. Anyway, the general manager called me. Well, we were at site, and the general manager called me into this meeting. And I walked into the room. I was the last to come into the room because I must have been told the time was different to everybody else. 17 people sitting at a table in an L shape, big L shape. Me and the GM at a separate table. And
What?
This is
Segmentation 101.
I wonder what's going on here. And I'd walked in thinking I didn't know what to think, quite frankly, because we were due to go live 24 hours later. So he said some very unpleasant things in the next 3 minutes, and then invited everybody else to have their yah-yahs. And they all said some extraordinarily unpleasant things. And I can remember sitting there feeling, you're really actually sitting there trying not to cry. Getting increasingly angry and trying to work out what on earth was going on here. So the upshot is that after about 40 minutes of everybody just piling poo on this program and on me and on, trying to pretend that they couldn't get on board, then the GM said, right, is everybody done? Because silence had sort of descended. Anyone else have anything to do? Anything to say? Nope. Right, well, here's the thing. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock, we're going live. So I expect you
get ready and do it.
That's right. Yeah. I expect you to support Michelle. If you've identified problems, then you have to be part of the solution. So shut up and get on with it. The expletives he used were maybe quite stronger than that. But I nearly fell off my chair. But we'd done so much consultation. In the end, you've got to rip the rug out. And I think that's what's gone on with COVID-19 is we've been talking for years about this remote working opportunity and which jobs shouldn't be in the city and are cluttering up our roads, and suddenly the rug is ripped out. And so I think it's very exciting. These political lessons teach us great things for the future.
Well said.
I'm about to do one of those rip the rug out projects right now where I've already started turning things off and no one's noticed.
Oh, that's good.
Love it.
Yeah, I do.
All right.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's the way you get things done.
So, Michelle, that's really good information.
Yes.
Sorry.
So I think there are some interesting things going on with COVID-19. I think it's really it's changed the way people are willing to work. It's proven to them they're capable of working in different ways, and it's removed, I think, much to many employers' chagrin, it will have removed what they thought saw as a valid argument that you cannot work from home, it'll be fascinating to see where this goes from here.
Yes, I agree. I agree. It will be fascinating because government and large employees people
Yeah.
have worked their way up the ranks and then just are not used to this
Yeah.
decentralized workforce at an individual office. When they talk about decentralized, they're talking about their offices are decentralized, but not a decentralized workforce. And Michael and I have had a conversation about this in the past, that we have our staff spread over Australia, Asia, New Zealand, and they work. They just do the job.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely right. We made a very successful business out of consulting engineering, being one of the first to actually do delivery of a project from multiple locations for a job for a client in Zurich for a job in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And we were using people from our offices in Canada, South America, Perth, Victoria, Brisbane, Sydney. Every office had somebody to do,
wow.
and actually it was amazingly effective because of the differences of time.
Yeah, and also you get the right person, doesn't matter where they are.
That's right. We built a very sustainable business model around that very item.
The one of the things that I think COVID-19 has touched on, or that this whole experience has touched a little bit of a nerve with me specifically, is around mental health. And I think that some people are finding it really tough to be isolated, like you mentioned your father at the beginning. When we go to work, we have a separation of work and home. I'm used to working from home. David's used to working from home most of the time. How have you found not being able to separate work from home, or how's your work affected your family and your family time?
That's a good question, particularly as it's been my husband that's really the one started working from home most recently. Since I set up Corporate Growing Pains 10 years ago, I have worked mostly from home when I'm not travelling for clients. And I love it. I can literally work from anywhere. I have worked from beaches in Hawaii and beaches on the Sunshine Coast, and it's a wonderful thing indeed. So the impact but watching the adaptation of somebody who has long wanted to work from home and then finally been allowed to was kind of interesting, and seeing that whole, he'd just appear in my office, every couple of hours, telling me about something that had just happened at work, and it was like,
Wow.
okay, can we just can we save it to the end of the day? But there was clearly, to your separation idea, is that he no longer had those colleagues around that he could share that experience. He deals with some very emotional issues from time to time in the job that he does, and so he needed to have an outlet. So your point is really valid, that the employers must evaluate what support structures are needed. Like, it's a risk analysis, right? Let's apply our business minds to it. It's a business problem. If you're going to work from home, where are the risks? And quite frankly, they've always made such a massive deal about the ergonomic risk. I think most people, if they're working from home, are going to be quite happy to be lying on the couch if that's what they want. They'll all take photos of their office set up and send it in, and then go lie on the couch and do the work. So whatever.
Yep.
Where are the other risks? And mental health, I think, is one of those that's not well unpacked yet, because it's only really just coming into, common parlance. People haven't been willing to talk about it, right?
And I think over the next 4 months, as we see the JobKeeper and the other government grant payments starting to pull out, we're going to see a lot of small businesses, small companies that are going under because they're only there because they're surviving through the JobKeeper and the other grant payments. They've got all of their other financials on hold, and in the next matter of months, everything's going to come onto them. And they've still not got an income, but they've now got all of these expenses. And I think that the mental health from the leaders of the small companies and the small businesses who own in their heart those businesses are really going to start hurting. Something that we spoke about recently as well. And I'm really anxious about that. Everything from the tourist industry through to your restaurants, through to small businesses that are just trying to stay alive.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think the ones that have kind of weathered this storm the best are the ones that went ahead and got active and creative. Oh, well, if we can't do this, then we'll do that. What are we going to do today? What hypothesis are we going to test about our business this week? And how should we, what success criteria will we set and how will we adapt? That fail fast thinking needs to be incorporated. And I think those sorts of concepts are not well understood in small business.
Yep.
And
especially those small businesses that people are very passionate about because they've had it for 10 years and it's their thing. They're very attached to it. So when you suggest that maybe they should pivot into doing something different, they're like, but I've done this for 10 years. It's worked. I've been able to raise a family from this business and things have changed.
Well, my dad had a failed company, a company I would have dearly loved to have taken over actually, and it failed ultimately because he just refused to budge. He and I had so many conversations about diversification, and it was a manufacturing engineering firm. It could have done it, still works. Oh man, it would have been very exciting. He just wouldn't do it. Just wasn't in him. And you cannot constrain your thinking. You have to constantly. I mean, we had the conversation earlier. Which text system are we using? Well, we're all using a different one in an hour from the one we're using right now. If you cannot go with this idea that we are all constantly changing, then you are going to sort of be stuck and come up against a hard place. So the more change fluency people can get in their lives, I think the better and more resilient people are going to be to, this is just the first, right? Maybe we won't have as big and as dramatic a lockdown, global lockdown in our lifetimes again, or maybe we will.
Maybe we will.
I hope not. I mean, for me, I'm my parents are in New Zealand. My partner's parents are in Japan. We can't visit them. They can't visit us.
Mm-hmm.
I can't go to my Vietnam team.
And I think, as you're well aware, I'm meant to be in the UK in about 4 days, travelling from the UK across to Czech Republic and then into Russia, because my plan was to doing a podcast from Chernobyl in 3 weeks' time. And I'm fairly sure that won't be happening now.
Yeah, the impact on our international travel and being able to overcome the tyranny of distance is sad. Yet I have to say that how lucky are we as a world that the technology is here that allows us to stay in contact. Imagine this happening 50 years ago or even 30 years ago.
Well, it did happen 50 years ago, didn't it?
Well, it did happen 50 years ago.
That's right. But now, I recently was writing a tender with you, Michelle, and I was sitting on one of your beautiful verandas doing a tender for a couple of days on the Sunshine Coast. So I can vouch you work very well from home in a very lovely atmosphere.
It's helpful, right? I always like to have views into the distance. Right now I'm looking out to Morton Island, so I find it's important to create a nice space around you. And that's been the case in my entire life, even in an office. This whole move to this hot desking ridiculousness that really wasn't about cost saving. I mean, they talk about it being about cost saving, but the upfront cost of that change and the lack of productivity, just ridiculous. Again, where was the risk assessment of what is the risk of everybody using that phone without us providing cleaning products, all these sorts of things. So, it's wherever you are in the world, having a support structure and knowing that a support structure starts with what makes me feel good. in this space and building things around that. It goes to your point earlier about mental health, really starting to create those methods. But I saw this great thing yesterday about on the days that you feel good, write down as many things that you can think of that make you feel great about today and or that you've achieved in your life or those sorts of things, and then put it in the drawer. And then the days that you wake up and feel not so good, pull that list out and read that list and see what a difference it makes to your world. And these little tools that I wasn't taught at school, it took me a virtual mental breakdown to find somebody who taught me some of these tools. So important to us. I really think we have to work on mental resilience from the get-go.
Yeah. And it's also working from home. It's the best pet-friendly environment that I can think of.
Totally. I've got 3 cats. One that just sits with me all day, every day.
And isn't that comforting?
That's interesting because I've got one whining at the door because the door is closed to my office at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
Well, fortunately, he's not meowing next to me at the moment. He's sound asleep over there. But so he too takes comfort of us being home, and it's nice.
So, Michelle, if you were talking to somebody who was considering going into business for themselves, what would you consider would be challenging?
As they go into business, they will almost certainly have a big passion that they're going in with. And having to stop for a moment and consider what could be the alternative scenarios to that will help me be resilient to unexpected situations is going to be a really difficult thing for them, because they're going to want to go off, run hard after that thing they're so passionate about. The problem with that is that they could easily trip over. And it doesn't take a long time, David. I think that there are many professionals like myself, like really probably any of us, who could sit with those sorts of people for half a day even. A day would be better, and just work through the process of, okay, here's the business model that you're going to business with, that you're going to go and set up. What are the skills and assets and experience that you contain in this business model already, and how could they be otherwise applied in other circumstances? It's basic scenario planning and just taking that moment to give some certainty. I'll tell you what that's going to make a huge difference to, in my view, is when they go to the bank and try and get some money to fund the business. The fact that they've put some thought to, well, this is the thing I'm pursuing, and if something goes awry, I've got this and that, this lever and that lever, and I've already thought about how I can pivot without letting go necessarily of the original idea.
Yeah, we were talking about this a couple of days ago, where the people who go through investment rounds, they get a lot of feedback. Like, I've heard of people going for seed round investment. They've had 300 meetings with investors, and every meeting they get a new bit of advice, and they change the pitch, and then they go to the next one, they change the pitch, and so forth and so forth. Whereas those people, probably like all of us, where we've set up a business based on our skill set, we've kind of said, okay, well, we're going to start this, but we've not had those investment rounds where we've had to actually prove that it's going to work to someone who's going to give us money to do this. It's our money, and we're just believing in ourselves.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm largely the same, and yet I can't get past the idea that even though of more recent times I've chosen to describe myself as a change whisperer, the reality is I could turn my hand to so many other things at a moment's notice, and have done in over 30 years of doing business. So people have to adapt to this idea that if something's not going right, I remember working with some architects when I first started Corporate Growing Pains. I went and did this scenario planning with them. They wanted to understand, they didn't want to get into designing jails. I really quite clearly remember them saying that. I do not want to design a jail ever. Well, if not that, then what? And they really wanted to create this space that would bring them joy and their clients joy. And so I've been watching their evolution over 10 years, and them working out that they wanted to be designing in tourism space was their foundation stone.
Yep.
They're both architects, and he went off and worked for somebody else for the next 5 years. And in the next 5 years, he worked part-time and less until he's now working in his own business full-time. That's
Right.
what you have to be able to think to yourself, how do I make myself and my family resilient? Because I look at people who struggle with mental health issues, and I don't feel like I see in talking to them, where's the purpose? What's the underlying reason for what they're doing? What have they thought about to make sure that they can bring that to a reality? And it's when they start to see failure points that it brings them down and knocks them out. And the more they can think about this stuff, just even for a little time up front, the more resilient they become, the greater success they'll achieve in their lives.
That's very good advice for anyone who is not only looking at starting a business, but if they're looking at doing a business change immediately. Very interesting.
Yep. We normally ask 3 questions of all of our guests that are common, so that we've got some sort of thread to hang on by. The first question is, what would you do differently if you had a chance?
In my entire life?
No, in your career.
No, I'd like to know what in our entire life.
Oh, mate, there's not enough.
There was one Wednesday night when...
Yeah, there's not enough red wine for that conversation today anyway. So, but to your question, it's a great question. I mean, on the one hand, I want to say I wouldn't change a thing. And on the other hand, seeing as you pose it, I would have gone and got a trade.
Okay.
I love building and construction. It's like my hobby, I have to say. Sadly. I don't know if it's sadly. It costs money. That's why it's sad. But, it's one of those things. I think a trade, later in life, I realised that a trade can be a really wonderful foundation stone. And it doesn't stop you going to uni later. I mean, I didn't go to uni straight out of school anyway. So I did go and do a secretarial course, and that's partly because I grew up at a time where still we were suffering under these sort of, the women go and be secretaries kind of idea. I didn't have good role models otherwise for alternative views. But looking back, I would have loved to have gone and been a builder.
Yeah, you've actually answered our second question, which is what would you be doing if you weren't doing what you're doing now?
No, it's not the same question.
Oh.
Don't you try and outdo the whisperer. I nearly called you a steak whisperer.
Well, so the point of the previous answer was to say that everything is a stepping stone. What you choose at one moment in your life is not like. But I grew up at a time when it was ingrained in us that it's a job for life, and it's not a job for life.
Yeah.
It's the first step on a journey of life, and so that's what I would do differently: is think more about the idea of do whatever till you find your passion. But so, what would I be doing if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, aside from lying on a beach? Would be. I would be making and marketing my chili sauces, my srirachas, and my marmalade.
Oh, yum.
Okay, so where can we get our hands on those?
Well, we'll work out a time when we can finally meet in a coffee shop, and we'll do a handover.
Excellent.
This segment has been brought to you by Michelle's chili sauces.
Last question. Do you have any predictions for the future of technology?
I feel like there's been so much change in such a rapid period. It was back in the mid-90s that I was working with Optus, and I had my first Motorola flip phone. How heavy it was, but I loved it. But now it's like we've got everything on the phone, and kind of going back to when I was 6 or 7, my brother building me my first his, not mine, his Dick Smith computer,
Oh, yeah.
and then creating a program to do mazes on it, which is where I think I got my love of technology. So what's the future going to hold? Well, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot more automation, and I feel like there's a great deal of fear at the moment surrounding that. The robots are coming to take our jobs. And I believe deeply that the robots taking jobs that put people in danger or in which they are more productive releases us, frees us to a higher purpose that we have not yet even begun to rightly imagine, yet get a hold of. Maybe some people in COVID-19 have had their first ever glimpse of, if I wasn't tied to this thing, and despite all the worry and things, I mean, gee, it's been an amazing journey on social media, right? To see the creativity and crazy things that people are doing and how they're adapting. So
Yeah.
I do think that there's more of this sort of stuff, more of us being able to live wherever, do whatever we want to do, and more robots doing more stuff that really human beings probably shouldn't be doing.
And then those robots become sentient and we're all...
Yeah, and they take over the world when we're squashed like
The
the
Matrix.
I actually agree with you. Like, I believe that there's probably a future in our maybe within a few generations where money isn't so much of an issue, and we are as a species able to employ the use of our inventions to build ourselves a better life.
Yeah.
Rather than through greed and money.
I think the Industrial
commerce.
Revolution has had its time, and capitalism in the current model also has had its time. And socialism may not be the answer, and communism is probably not exactly the answer, but none of the things that we've got in this moment are the answer. And what is happening across the world right in this moment is very clear evidence that there is an uprising, that enough is enough. We have to start being humans and humanity, and showing humanity towards each other. And what if removing the monkey off your back of having that job that requires such manual labour or the like actually did allow... Like, we have mining companies that are sort of having this challenge of, we want to automate, what do we do with the people? And their journey, I think, will inform a lot of manufacturing and other work to sort of make that shift. Even in, it'd be interesting to see what that looks like in a hospitality sense, and all of those sorts of things. So I think technology is very exciting. It's something we have to learn to accept. It scares me a little, we're so reliant on it.
That's true.
What do? You have a contingency plan.
That's really, really good. So, Michelle, where can people contact you as the Change Whisperer? Where's the best place for them to go to?
They can probably find me most easily on LinkedIn, Michelle Delebet. They could find me vaguely via a web presence, which is corpgrowingpains.com. And I think they're probably the easiest ways for people to find me.
Great.
It's been lovely to speak with you, Michelle, and we're really thankful for coming on the podcast and having a chat with us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a great chat, and I look forward to some future ones over that red wine.
Sounds a good idea.
Nice.
Let's go into more personal things. Sounds great.
And don't forget the sriracha.
Oh, I won't. Don't you worry. Hey,
So you've listened this far. This podcast is brought to you by Michael Lobb and David Camus. We both work for companies that work in the IT space, but in different areas. So we'd like you to help us by at least messaging us or liking us on Twitter or following us on Twitter. Give us a like or a follow on Twitter. I'm at Michael Lobb, MichaelLobb, and David is at Dave with 7, so DAVEWITH, the numeral 7. That'd be amazing if you can share and comment on this podcast using your favorite podcasting tool, as well as subscribe. That'd be awesome, and we'd love you for it. Thanks. Bye.